How many of you all have ever played the game Graveyard? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? We would play it on road trips, and kids in the car were invited to identify any four-legged animal, and they would count them. And if you went by graveyard, you had to start all over, right? So, no, okay. Graveyards are interesting places. My favorite graveyard is in the city of Beaufort, North Carolina. And I love to wander around in it because there are seashells, there are stories of pirates, there are little twinkly things, and of course the history on the gravestones. You can feel the energy there. My first experience with a graveyard, I remember it was in the behind the Presbyterian Church in Leggett, North Carolina. And I remember somebody telling me, you can't step on the graves, right? So I remember trying to sidestep the graves, wondering what would happen if I did. God only knew what would happen if I stepped on a grave. Graves are places to remember. Graveyards are places to not forget. Graveyards can carry a lot of memories, some humorous, some silly, some super sad, some mysterious. Do you have a story of a graveyard? Maybe turn to a neighbor and tell a memory of a story of a graveyard. Go. All right, everybody, thank you for doing that. As I say, graveyards are places filled with very mixed emotions and feelings. And I know that some of us have been in them far too recently and far too often, especially as we have moved through the season of COVID. Why am I talking about graveyards today? Well, it's because our reading from Ezekiel and our reading from the Gospel of John both take place in graveyards. The graveyard for Ezekiel, about 586 years before the birth of Christ. Ezekiel was a prophet, and the prophet's role was to kind of speak to the people on behalf of God. Now, the people that Ezekiel is addressing are the Israelites, those who have been in exile. They have been removed from their homeland, and they are now in a place some 500 miles away that is completely foreign to them, a place they do not know. Their temple has been destroyed. The rug, their spiritual and cultural rug, has literally been pulled out from underneath them, and they don't know what is up right now. Hence, this image of the valley of the dry bones. Ezekiel is placed by God into this valley and told to walk around, and there are hundreds, you might imagine. It's easy to imagine these days, due to special effects in movies, what this looks like, right? But it's not just one or two, it's a multitude we hear. And then God calls Ezekiel to speak to those bones and speak them into existence again. So they come together. Rattling, 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 sinew, skin. But that's not enough. They don't have breath. They don't have life. And so God calls for a second moment of prophesying to call forth the winds, breath, air, to animate them and to give them life. And so they're able to stand. Now, one of the things that is kind of hidden in this text is the connection to the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 2, when God breathes into humanity, when God animates with the spirit, ruach. So it's very intentional here that our author makes that connection to life. For it is from this graveyard of dry bones that life is promised and life comes for the people of Israel. So one of the things that we might think about as we move through our service today and hear more is, what does it feel like to be lifeless? What might it feel like to be called back to life again? We've just come through a period of pandemic where we have experienced being shut down, told to stay put. I know some of you are in situations right now that are hard and that are making you question life and health and healing. So what might it feel like to be connected again to that energy of Genesis? Because that's exactly what's happening here. Ezekiel is calling out life. And then we have a second graveyard, and it's in the Gospel of John. Familiar story. On the fifth Sunday of Lent, we hear about Jesus calling Lazarus out of darkness, out of death, out of the tomb. And the same thing is happening here. It is out of this death that life comes. And so what John's doing here is pointing to the resurrection with Lazarus' own resurrection. And notice, too, the important thing that happens is this particular Gospel of John, this story, is the last of the formal signs in the Gospel of John. And right after this, we hear that the religious leaders are going to plot to take Jesus' life. So this is the thing that causes the leaders to want to put Jesus to death. And not only Jesus, but Lazarus also. So isn't that interesting that the giving of life has threatened the authorities and made them want to end Jesus' life? But one of the places I want to focus on here is that idea of resurrection and life. This is the place where Jesus makes that famous statement, I am resurrection and I am life. And do you ever wonder why he says those two together? Why not just end with resurrection? That's a pretty powerful enough thing all by itself, right? I am resurrection, full stop. But he goes on and says, I am life. And the reason for this is because the resurrection is a one-time event. And what Jesus is saying here is that life is ongoing. It's not some future thing. Jesus says, I am life right now. I am life right now. So the question comes to us, how are we living our lives? How are we being life? How are we embodying life? How are we sharing life with others? And I think that's important because we hear also in this passage that, the famous line, Jesus weeps. And Jesus is disturbed. And so we get a sense here that grief is real. To be human is to be sad. And Jesus cannot take away that death. In fact, being human, part of being human is the death itself. But that doesn't mean that Jesus is not currently about life. In fact, what life looks like for Jesus in John's gospel happens in chapter 12, because this raised Lazarus is found reclining at the side of Jesus at the table. So Lazarus isn't resurrected just to get a better job or to improve his golf game or to learn a new instrument. No. Lazarus is resurrected to embrace life. What does life look like? It's being at the side of Jesus. And that's what you and I have been doing during this whole season of Lent, is moving toward Jesus. And these powerful, powerful words, Jesus was disturbed. Jesus began to weep. Then Jesus again greatly disturbed. Part of being human, right? One commentator says that Jesus isn't really, the focus of this disturbance and these tears isn't necessarily about Lazarus. because Jesus knows what's going to happen to Lazarus. But the cause of this disturbance is anger and frustration at life and all of the things that life brings about. All of the things that you've experienced, Jesus experienced. The thing that makes Jesus angry is mental illness and depression and cancer and chemo. The things that make Jesus so angry are violence and prejudice and killing each other. The thing that makes Jesus so perturbed and shout out are racism and phobias and prejudice. These all culminate around the tomb, and Jesus is disturbed. But that's why he says, I am life, because he imagines a different life for us, and that is the life that we are promised. And it's the life in which we know that we do not go through all of these things alone. Jesus has been there, and we have each other to walk us through the places of life. And again, what is happening? A connection to Genesis. Jesus calls life into existence, just like on that first day. So, friends, we've made it to the 5th Sunday of Lent. Thank goodness. Here we are. But ahead is Palm Sunday. And ahead is Easter. And through it all and beyond it all is the life that we have, the life that we've been given, the life that we have to give away, the life that we share. So I guess graveyards will always be a part of our landscape, as will death. And today we learn from Jesus that grief and expressions of grief are a part of the human experience. And we learn that grief is different for everyone. But more importantly, we learn that the graveyard is not that final stop. I am resurrection and I am life, Jesus says. So it's not about what God will do. It's about what God is doing in your lives right now. So resurrection is present in the bread and the wine that we will receive today, as we do every Sunday. And I invite you to take the opportunity to embrace new life and new hope and new opportunity that are calling out to you from the dark places of this earthly life. And hear again Jesus' words. He is here to take away the power that the past holds over us. He is here to breathe new life into our tired bones. And he is here to unbind us and let us go free. Thanks be to God.